Thank you, Dr. Vidino, for that very warm welcome. And of course, Dr. Knapp, it's wonderful to be back here at George Washington University, a place I'm happy to call home. I'd like to thank and congratulate the team here at George Washington University for convening this important gathering to come together to discuss the global partnership to combat extremism online in all of its forms. It is indeed ironic that one of humanity's greatest inventions, its most liberating inventions, the internet, is being misused in this way, as a vessel for violence and hate. But it is no longer a matter of speculation that terrorists and extremists use internet platforms and applications to inspire violence, to spread extremist ideology, and to plan and execute attacks. Each tragic event and incident reconfirms this. Today, we come together following yet another horrific attack, this one in London around the Houses of Parliament, my home and my place of work. 5 people tragically lost their lives. 50 were injured, 30 were hospitalized. The victims came from 12 different countries, and within 24 hours, Daesh claimed responsibility. We know how extremists manipulate information and sow the seeds of discord in our society. And we know how they use propaganda to reinforce grievance, ignite hatred. And we know how they convince people to give up their lives and to join the fight. They target those who are vulnerable, marginalized, invisible, feeling left out. And the pool from which they recruit is expanding exponentially as billions are connected to social networks. Yet, unlike in the physical world, where governments can take clear and firm action to keep people safe and secure in their homes, in their communities, the virtual space is a different domain. It's the domain of commercial companies, and we must rely on them and their cooperation and support to keep people from harm. If we are to protect human life in this ever more connected world, we need a new model of shared responsibility, and this is the conversation I would like to have with you today. I would like to challenge our thinking and ask how we move from reacting to crisis and incidents to prevention and full acceptance of responsibility on all sides. In Western societies, we hold sacred democratic values: our freedom of speech, our right to privacy, the rule of law, safety and security. These values apply to the internet as well, which we all believe must be free, open, and accessible. But there's growing public sentiment that not enough is being done to tackle extremist use of the internet. And when it comes to the question of what to do about it, we are at an impasse. The voices of consumers and brands are loud and clear, and the recent exodus of top advertisers from social media platforms sends the strongest possible message that their products and services must not be promoted next to deplorable extremist content. And recently, Germany proposed legislation that sets out binding new standards for how social networking companies should delete criminal content. The challenge with this approach, however, is that regulation creates a new set of national rules for these businesses, which are by definition global and borderless. And there is significant complexity around any regime that governs online activity, not least keeping up with the obligation current given the speed and evolution of technology and the extraterritorial jurisdiction that applies. So, we are at a critical moment when united action to tackle this threat is the only way forward. Governments and experts can provide extensive knowledge and rigorous understanding of the threat, but industry is best placed to innovate on technical solutions that address this threat specifically on their commercial platforms. They must innovate and automate their response to identifying and removing this vile, hateful material, so that together we can ensure that everything possible is done to stop it from infiltrating and poisoning the global audience. And increasingly, we see a potent cycle of hate across multiple groups and ideologies, as all sides of the extremist spectrum feed off each other, escalating tensions. We saw this post the London attack when this image appeared. The photographer who took this picture said he posted it because it showed a young woman wearing a hijab who was traumatized by the events around her. But this was not how she was portrayed on social media. The image was wildly misappropriated by right-wing groups as representing her as insensitive and indifferent to the carnage that was unfolding around her. The growing audacity of all types of extremist groups is perpetuating this vicious cycle. The far right asserts that Islam represents an existential threat to the West, stating that all Muslims are supportive of terrorism. We have seen this in terms of memes such as refugees that they use on social media, which stigmatize those who are fleeing the atrocities in the Middle East. The far right is using groups like Daesh as an opportunity to frighten, sow division in communities, and make their extremist narratives more palatable. Social networks algorithmically connect like-minded individuals, and they amplify their passions. This is at the core of the online advertising business model. But these connections can channel people into echo chambers where highly emotive and passionate content, amplified by these algorithms, reinforces extremist messaging. This creates an illusion of strength in numbers, when in fact these views are in fact fringe. Over the past year, we've seen new developments, such as the use of social media live during attacks, that complicates disruption efforts. Terrorists document their unspeakable actions, and they bask in a nihilistic, personal moment of fame and notoriety. Furthermore, the footage is later released and used in instructional videos to inspire and incite more violence, perpetuating a vicious cycle. The precedent for real-time sharing during a terrorist attack was tragically set in 2016 in the broadcast of a French policeman and his wife's murder on social media while their little boy looked on in horror. We saw this used again a few weeks ago during a horrific attack in Kabul on a military hospital where the attackers posted live photos as the event was unfolding. Terrorist use of the internet as a sphere of influence will continue to evolve and adapt, and we need new methods to quickly identify and remove terrorist content, and to deliver more effective counter-narrative campaigns. And we must be evidence-based. Too often we are reactionary, and we do not adequately deal with the complexities that are faced. Daesh in particular produces material designed to capitalize on community tensions and hostility towards Muslims in the West. This further isolates groups away from mainstream society. Their message is that every Muslim has a duty to fight, that jihad is in fact local, as well as global, and that if they're unable to travel, they are legitimate targets that they can execute in their home countries. Following the attack on Berlin's Christmas market in December, Daesh released a statement on Telegram in Arabic, French, and English, encouraging their supporters to carry out lone actor attacks in the West during the holiday period, specifically advising supporters to target celebrations, clubs, hospitals, markets, and movie theaters. Tragically, this foretold the Reina nightclub attack in Istanbul on New Year's Eve. We have seen this type of call before. Last year, the then spokesman, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, called for the group's supporters to carry out terrorist attacks during Ramadan. At the time, analysts regarded this call as less persuasive than his previous fatwas. But in fact, it proved deadly. It was the bloodiest Ramadan this century. Other emergent narrative themes in Daesh propaganda include the total rejection of LGBTQ communities and a hatred of nationalism and secularism, which have been cited as a motivation for the attack on the Pulse nightclub in Orlando and the lorry attack in Nice on Bastille Day. This directional shift in Daesh's official online publications is well known. This image on the left of the screen shows its Dabiq magazine, which encouraged supporters to embrace the caliphate and come to build a new state. The second shows its newer publication, Rumia, which calls on its followers to carry out acts of terrorism wherever they live, whenever they can, reflecting the new reality of its survival as an ideology. Let me illustrate some of the atrocities that Rumia has inspired, as each edition contains graphic instructional videos. The second edition called for lone actor attacks using knives, with a full demonstration on a frightened hostage. This was replicated in the heinous murder of a French priest in Normandy, and attacks in the Minnesota shopping mall last year. The third edition of Rumia advised its supporters to carry out vehicle-based lone actor attacks, praising the Bastille Day attack in Nice, and replicated in Berlin, and also here in the United States at Ohio State University. Recently, a scene showing how to build a shrapnel-filled IED in a kitchen was disseminated. More than 100 links to this video were posted across 29 platforms within 1 hour. This was organized on Telegram, distributed on Twitter, and the video was hosted on YouTube, Archive, SendVid, and Google Drive. Part of the terrorist ecosystem used by Daesh to ensure their propaganda has maximum impact. 24 hours after the video's release, despite best efforts, half of these links were still active. We should not be fooled by Daesh's ability to produce and distribute propaganda, or that Daesh's ability to produce and distribute propaganda will decrease as its military losses mount. According to research the UK government has undertaken, as Daesh have been degraded and defeated and their infrastructure compromised on the ground, its unofficial brand ambassadors have become prominent distributors of its propaganda. These devotees critically create their own material, which they promote and discuss across networks. Idolization of lone actor terrorists and martyrs for the cause feeds an increasing audacity in attacks and offers the members a chance to gain fame, glory, and status. We now see other terrorist groups mimicking Daesh's online attacks with devastating consequences. In fact, we see an escalating competitive dynamic among terrorist groups. It's a savage game of one-upsmanship. In the past few weeks, we've seen the Syrian al-Qaeda-linked franchise, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, launch a magazine called Al-Aba. It's a professional media brand that it uses now for online communications and videos. In mid-March, they released their first English-language statement, rebuking the U.S. for its selfish policy in Syria. And the quantity and quality of Daesh's output, while it's still starting to fluctuate, we mustn't lose sight of other extremist groups seeking to increase their online presence. In the UK, a neo-Nazi group called National Action was prescribed recently for glorifying terrorism, having built up a fan base through the use of explicitly youth-oriented material to reach new recruits. The ability for other terrorist groups' propaganda to incite violence and attacks is no longer theoretical, as evidenced by the brutal murder of a member of Parliament, Joe Cox, last summer. The threat we face continues to grow. We must develop and rapidly deliver an ever stronger response at pace and scale. Now, some progress has been made. In the UK, we've developed a world-leading approach to tackling terrorist and violent extremist use of the internet that focuses on 2 areas of work. We work with industry to voluntarily remove extremist content online through the Counterterrorism Internet Referral Unit. We bring communication experts and civil society groups together to develop and run targeted and effective counter-messaging campaigns that provide compelling alternative voices to this extremist rhetoric. Working together with industry in 2016, the UK's Counterterrorism and Internet Referral Unit, run by our Metropolitan Police Department, secured the removal of over 120,000 pieces of terrorist and extremist content. We supported the setting up of this model in the EU, working with our partners, and their unit launched in 2015 in July, which also works to secure the removal of content in a wider range of languages. This unit has reported A successful statistic of 90% of their referrals to industry have been removed. Following the Paris attacks, Telegram acted swiftly to suspend the account of 78 public channels that were used by Daesh and its supporters in 12 languages. Telegram recently responded to a UK request to remove English language Daesh propaganda. And last year we saw leading internet companies come together in December in a proposal to build a shared hash database of terrorist content at the EU Internet Forum. So this looks like progress, right? But it's also, in many cases, a little bit too little, too late. By the time we react, research shows that terrorists have already reached their audience. UK government research shows that the majority of those links to terrorist content are shared within the first 2 hours of release. And they also anticipate takedowns and suspensions, and they instruct their supporters to return to the open internet with strategies to reassemble, reconfigure, and be back online. This must change. We need a new approach, a new partnership. Excuse me. Governments across the world are agitating. They're looking at legislation to force more timely removal of content by social media companies. This is reinforced by fines and other sanctions. I do not believe that this approach alone will succeed. It is incumbent upon industry to drive this change. They must build new capacity that is holistic, targeted, and dynamic to address these threats and reclaim their platforms from those who seek to exploit them, to incite violence or push dogma and repression. Finally, in the terms and conditions that govern these sites, these are based on corporate philosophies, values, and beliefs that surely the goalposts can be moved. While violent extremist groups seek to undermine the very ideals and values that the internet was established to advance, we must reinforce its capability to be the answer to hatred and intolerance, rather than a vehicle for it. We must understand that the influence of terror groups online, and we must deploy the use of strong data analytics to recognize how terrorists amplify their messages and decipher the patterns of their deadly actions. And in terms of technology, we need to improve solutions that classify the language of terrorism, automate its identification and removal, and create tools that better tackle automated bots and other techniques that support these propaganda machines. In essence, we must take a stance in solidarity against terrorism, solidarity across governments, industries, and people all around the world. The internet is universal, and it is imperative that developers consider these dangers alongside other internet harms. And we must empower the global community with better tools to respond and report harmful content, to speak out and to take action. Every person has the ability to recognize bias, hatred, and intolerance and say, no, not on my profile, not in my name. We can't let the world retreat to a dark place of ignorance and prejudice. We must stand up for what we believe in: freedom, peace, democracy, understanding, and inclusivity. A world in which knowledge, debate, and discussion bring people closer together and make them feel part of something that's greater than themselves. To close, I would like to leave you with a quote from Prime Minister Theresa May the day following the London attack. She said, "Yesterday, we saw the worst of humanity, but we will remember the best." Thank you.